In this video, we're going to talk about bargaining, and we're specifically going to look at unstructured bargaining and the core. With unstructured bargaining, you don't specify the mechanism under which the parties bargain. So for example, you don't say player one makes an offer, and then if that offer is rejected, the game ends. Rather, what you do is you say there's a bunch of players, they negotiate somehow trying to come to an agreement. And if they come to an agreement within the allowed rules, then that happens. But you also have to specify what happens if the parties don't come to an agreement. And the solution concept we'll be using is the core. The core lists all the outcomes that cannot be improved upon by any coalition, by any group of parties that are capable of reaching an agreement on their own. I know that definition probably doesn't make sense right now. Hopefully it will by the end of this video. In this video, there are going to be three players, Kim, Frank, and Sophia, and they're going to try to divide some money. In our first game, the three individuals have $90 to divide, and the rules are they either have to agree to a division where the sum of what they all get is $90, or if they don't agree to any division, then they each get nothing. And all three people have to agree to any agreement that they reach, and if just one person doesn't agree, all three people get zero. So I'd like you to think about what are the possible set of divisions they could reach. And I know when answering this question about real humans, you would certainly bring in psychology. You know, how do people behave? How do they think about fairness? But for the sake of this video, I just want to assume people are rational and self-interested. So, ignore concerns about fairness. Just ask yourself, if all we know is that these three individuals are rational and are self-interested, what are the possible divisions that they could reach? In my opinion, I think all we know is that the parties should agree to a division and the sum of what everyone gets will be 90. By the way, it's implicitly assumed that no one will get a negative amount of money. And the reason is that no matter what division the parties reach, no subgroup could do better. So even if Kim just gets $1 and Frank and Sophia split the rest, it would, Kim's better off getting that $1 than she would be saying, no, I reject this agreement. And we have no way of knowing a priori without knowing something about the people's psychology or something, which I don't want to look into, of how they're going to divide the money. So when we look at the concept of the core, and remember we are solving this for the core, we're saying an outcome is in the core if each individual will say, yeah, this outcome doesn't make me worse off than something else I could do. And no matter what the division is, even if one person gets zero, no one can do better on their own. And so all outcomes where the sum of what everyone gets is 90 are in the core. Let's look at another game. And in this game, we're going to make one change. Before, if the three parties couldn't agree to a division of the $90, they each got nothing. Now, if they can't agree, Kim and Frank still get nothing. But Sophia, she gets 40. What would you predict will happen in this game? What are the possible outcomes that rational, self-interested people might reach? What I would predict would happen would be that Sophia gets at least 40. Because, if they said, hey, let's divide the money, and Sophia, you only get 38, she would say, well, no, I can do better on my own. So she'll get at least 40. Maybe she could get more, but maybe not. And of course, the sum of what all three parties get should equal $90. And given these two conditions, we don't know what will happen. That will depend on human psychology, which is beyond the scope of this video. So again, there are two conditions that dictate the core in this example. This game illustrates the concept of Batna. Your Batna is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your Batna is what you get if negotiations break down, or what you get if you just walk away from negotiations saying, forget you all, I'm going to be on my own. You should do no worse in a negotiation than your Batna. So Sophia should say, look, I get 40 if this whole thing doesn't work. You need me for this to work, so I'm going to get at least 40 in the final deal. In real life, your Batna is extremely important. Let's imagine that you have a good job, but you get another job offer, and you're thinking of taking the second job offer, and you're negotiating salary for the second job offer. You should say to yourself, all right, what do I get if I don't take this second job offer? What is my salary at my current job? And that's your Batna. You're saying to yourself, gee, if I don't work out a deal with this new potential employer, I still have my old job, so my old job is my Batna. I better get an arrangement. I better get something at least as good as my old job offer, or I'm not going to take the new job offer. So when you're negotiating in real life, think what your Batna is and accept no worse than your Batna. And of course, you should also be thinking about what other people's Batna is. So in this game, it's assumed everything is common knowledge. So Kim and Frank know Sophia's Batna is 40, and they shouldn't even consider trying to say, hey, let's come to this agreement where Sophia gets 35. They should say to themselves, no, look, we need Sophia to reach a deal. Her Batna is 40. This breaks down, she gets 40. We can't offer her less than 40 and think she'll accept it. So know your own Batna. Be prepared to walk away if you don't get at least that much, but also know other people's Batnas, and don't try to offer them less than their Batna. Don't expect that they will accept less than their Batna. Let's do another game. In this game, if the parties can't come to an agreement, Kim, well, she still gets nothing, but now Frank gets 45 and Sophia gets 40. What do you think the outcomes in the core are? What are the likely outcomes that the rational, self-interested people in this situation could reach? Well, everyone has to at least get their Batna. Frank's Batna is 45, so what Frank ends up getting in the final negotiations have to be at least 45. Sophia's Batna is 40, so she has to get at least 40, and they only have 90 to divide, so the sum of what everyone gets has to be 90. And of course, this means that poor Kim, she has no hope of getting more than 5, and she could get considerably less than 5. And that's because, Kim should realize this. Kim should say, look, Frank's never going to accept less than 45. Sophia's never going to accept less than 40. So there's only $5 left, and I can only, I could best get 5 if I'm a really good negotiator, but I'm certainly never going to get more than that. Let's do another game, and in this game, everyone has a positive Batna. Now, if they can't come to an agreement, Kim gets 10, Frank 45, and Sophia 40. What are the outcomes that you think are in the core in this game? Or restated, what are the outcomes that rational, self-interested people might agree to? Well, I would predict people in this game are not going to come to an agreement because Kim will want at least 10, Frank will want at least 45, Sophia at least 40, but you add up 10, 45, and 40, and it's more than 90. So there is no agreement they can reach where everyone is no worse off than if negotiations just break down. And indeed, if the parties know a teeny bit about bargaining, they would look at each other's Batnas and say, this is hopeless. We're not going to come to an agreement. In this next game, we're going to make things a bit more complicated. Now, they're still trying to divide $90, but if they can't come to an agreement, if all three can't come to an agreement, then we enter a new game where Kim and Frank have the right to divide $70. And if Kim and Frank can't come to this agreement over how to divide 70, they still get nothing. But if the three people can't agree on how to divide 90, but Kim and Frank are able to come to an agreement on how to divide 70, then Kim and Frank will get whatever division they agree to, assuming the sum of what they each get is indeed $70, and Sophia will be left out and get nothing. What do you think will happen in this game? What's the core? And try to express your answer in terms of mathematical expressions, please. Well, what I think will happen is the three parties will agree to divide the $90. That maximizes the sum of their wealth, but Kim and Frank, what those two get together will be at least $70, which means that Sophia, she is going to get at most 20, but maybe a lot less than 20. The reason is, let's imagine they come to an agreement, and it turned out the sum of what Kim and Frank got was less than 70. Kim and Frank should say to themselves, wait a minute, we can do better than this. The sum of what we're getting is less than 70, so it's possible for us to both get more than we got before if we ditch Sophia. And so, that will happen, assuming everyone is rational and self-interested. So if Kim and Frank working together without Sophia involved, they know they have the capacity to get 70, then in the final agreement with Sophia, Kim and Frank will at least get 70. But we would predict that if the players are rational and self-interested, they should be able to come to an agreement of all three players because they're all better off, right? So if just Kim and Frank are going to divide the 70, both Kim and Frank could be better off if they include Sophia, give her a little bit, but then Kim and Frank each do better than if they were just on their own. So the possible outcomes that are in the core are those represented by the two mathematical expressions on the screen. Well, now let's make things even more complicated. Again, three people trying to divide $90. Now, if Kim and Frank come to an agreement without Sophia, then Kim and Frank get to divide 70. But if just Frank and Sophia can come to an agreement, then those two can divide 60. So the rules are, if you have all three people coming to an agreement, they get to divide 90. But if you get just two people, if those two people are Kim and Frank, then they can divide 70 and Sophia gets nothing. But if Frank and Sophia can come to an agreement, then they can divide 60, but we'll only take one agreement. So, if Kim, Frank, and Sophia come to an agreement, there can't be a separate agreement with Kim and Frank. So what do you think will happen? What are the outcomes in the core? And please express these outcomes in terms of mathematical expressions. Well, the outcomes in the core are given by the three expressions on the screen. The parties can do the best if they all come to an agreement, and that means the sum of what they each get is 90. But Kim and Frank, that subgroup, they should get no worse than 70, because if they're getting worse than 70, they should ditch Sophia. But Frank and Sophia, they should get no less than 60 combined, because if they were, they should ditch Kim and then divide the 60. So we would predict an agreement will be reached that satisfies all three of the expressions on the screen. Let's look at the same game we had in the last slide, but now I'm asking, what is the least that Frank could get? So out of all the outcomes in the core, which means all the outcomes we expect to get if everyone is rational and self-interested, what do we think the worst outcome for Frank could be? And please give an exact numerical answer. Step one to finding this answer is to write out the mathematical conditions of what constitutes the core, and this is the same as we had before. So the three, the equality and two inequalities on our screen determine the core. We can find the solution for the least Frank could get by using a bit of algebra. We have the three conditions and we substitute in as I show on screen. And we find that the least Frank could get is 40. As an exercise, I won't show how to do this, but why don't you try to figure out what would go wrong if Frank were to get 39? So I'm claiming that's not in the core. Why not? How do we know that there can't be an outcome in the core where Frank only gets 39? Let's move on to another game. Now the rules are any two of the three people can reach an agreement and they get to divide $90. So if Kim and Frank reach an agreement to divide the 90, they get what they agreed to, but Sophia gets nothing. But similarly, if Frank and Sophia can come to an agreement, they can completely leave Kim out. What outcomes do you think are in the core? And please think deeply about this question. This is a tricky one. This game has no core. There is no outcome that the parties can reach where some subset of the parties couldn't do better. So let's say hypothetically, Kim and Frank say, hey, look, let's divide it equally. We each get 45. Okay, they say they're going to do that, but Sophia could say to Kim, no, 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 look, don't agree to that. I'll give you 46 and I'll take the rest. And Kim's like, okay, that makes me better off. But then Frank could go to Kim and say, no, Kim, look, you take 47 and I'll take the rest. Kim should agree to that. But then Sophia could go to Frank and say, no, Frank, look, I'll give you back 45 and I'll take 45. So no matter what agreement any three of the people or two of the people could reach, there'll always be a group of two people that can do better. So mathematically, this game has no core, which really means that the concept of the core doesn't help us solve this game. We really don't know what's going to happen if all we assume that the parties are rational and self-interested. Thank you for listening to me today.